Senator Lisa Joahir, who also serves as the communications director for the St. Lucia Labour Party, continues to blatantly lie and deceive St. Lucians. In a recent press brief, the SLP spokeswoman tried to deny that St. Lucia's agriculture sector declined by 17% in 2023. These are the facts according to the 2023 Social and Economic Review, a document prepared by the Ministry of Finance. On page 32, the opening paragraph reads, "Based on preliminary estimates, the agriculture sector's real value added declined by 17% in 2023. It went further on pages 33 to 38 to highlight the decline in the various agriculture subsectors. Fishing production declined by 4.6%. Livestock production declined by 17.3%. Chicken production declined by 11.7%. Pork production declined by 41.6%. Egg production declined by 7.8%. Banana production declined by 40.
My Flabo! Oh, it's a good morning to be here. It's been a while since we've had a press briefing because we've been debating, we've been deliberating, and we've been analyzing the budget and these failures, I should say, of this administration. So now I want to welcome you to our press briefing, and the first press briefing for the month of May, where we'll be sitting down analyzing St. Jude and CIP. Now, many revelations came about. We've all read what the IMF have indicated, so then we ask, is the budget valid? Are any of their statements valid if the IMF has indicated that their data and their statistics are actually flawed? But we'll go into that a bit later on in a few of our lives and shows. Make sure you tune into Fire FM on 107.7 FM for more information and deliberation. But now I'm going to call forth a heavy spitter. A man with a plan for Cash Southeast, the guy, the right guy, who will give us some insight on St. Jude and its development, especially as we recently saw an interesting documentary. Let us welcome Guy Joseph to the podium.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone, both our listeners and viewers in the diaspora and locally. Today we are here to just carry out a brief analysis of the information that is in circulation, at least the most recent information as it relates to the construction of the St. Jude Hospital. I need to give a preamble so that we can begin to put things into perspective. I don't know how many persons have been able to view the most recent documentary done by Mr. Dale Elliott on his Untold Stories and the continuation of the project of St. Jude. In fact, as Mr. Elliott indicated, that is his third in the series of documentaries on the St. Jude Hospital. Some of the points I will highlight here will help us to put things into perspective as it relates to the St. Jude project. I need to highlight also that we must look at this project in a fair and critical manner, not on the basis of politics of which government did what, because it very much appears to me that sometimes we give the UWP a basket to carry water and we expect the drum to be filled, while the Labour Party is given a bucket to carry water, the drum remains empty. And I will explain myself. So I will begin by quoting A report on the St. Jude project, May 16, 2018. Government of St. Lucia St. Jude Hospital fact-finding review. And on page 2, under the executive summary, let us put the St. Jude project into perspective. And I will read section B on page 2. It says, pursuant to the government directive issued in April 2010, a decision was made to reconstruct the surgical building and to renovate 2 other buildings so that the St. Jude Hospital would again be fully functional and its operations could be relocated from the George Odlum Stadium. It is also our understanding that this was a temporary solution until a new facility could be built. The medium or long-term solution was to construct a new facility. Now, we are talking about 2010. 15 years ago, we are in 2025. The decision was made by the Stevenson King-led administration, a project which fell directly under the office of the Prime Minister in the Department of Economic Planning. The Honorable Stevenson King was the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance and had direct oversight on this project. I want you to note that the plan to repair 2 of the buildings and reconstruct the surgical building which had been destroyed by fire was a temporary measure undertaken, and in the medium to longer term, a new building, a new hospital would be constructed. There were never plans. The plans was never to remain in the old St. Jude building as we are seeing now. So putting that into perspective, it is now 15 years later. You have to ask yourself, are we in the short term, medium term, or long term? In the planning process of developing this country, would 15 years be medium term? And should we not be constructing a new St. Jude Hospital? The reason why I dwelt on this a bit is so that we can put it into perspective what has transpired at the St. Jude Hospital. There are a couple other points I want to highlight because St. Jude remains a mystery until the untold stories broke out the news of what is going on there. As you heard in the report, those of you who have watched it, no one was allowed access to the site. No media. And the contractor looked like he had the ultimate say in what was happening at the site as far as reporting is concerned. There are discrepancies, according to the report, on the cost of the project. And I will highlight this because it is very important that the people of St. Lucia understand. And now, in hindsight, you would see what we said when we were in government. The summary of the cost of the projects is, in summary, without effective financial records to manage the project expenditure, there was no way at any point in time during the project that the PMU could provide an accurate budget to actual variance analysis. As a result, having inaccurate and incomplete transactional records meant that the government had an incomplete financial picture of the project. Specifically, we did not know detailed project financial records. The implementation of internal controls regarding reconciling data to supporting documentation. Non-monetary controls such as budget to actual analysis. This is one of the main indicators that there was a lack of financial accountability by the PMU and the steering committee. And that covers the period of 2010 to 2017. The period of time, remember UWP came into office under the Alan Chasney-led administration in 2016, and we continued the project to the end of the contract period, which ended thereabout in 2017. Here's what the report says. Based on our reconciliations of the EDD, that's the electronic database of the government general ledger, we note the following. The government's total of $80,250,238 differed from the electronic database total of $318,895. Let me repeat this number. $102,318,895. So the difference of $22,068,000. This indicates that not all receipts captured in the EDD were not posted in the government books and records on a monthly basis. While we are able to reconcile $68,260,000, an additional $34 million of costs do not appear to have been accounted for by the government's books and records. And that is why, when we inherited that project, it was necessary to evaluate all the information that was before us. We also noted an $11,990,000 of cost in SmartStream printouts for which we are not provided supporting documentation. The items are a combination of journal entries and vendor payments. And the final part of this I will touch before I go into the more recent events. As a result, we have not been able to quantify the actual amount disbursed for the project until the above reconciling items are journalized or corrected. However, based on our analysis, subject to backup documentation from the Treasury Department, the total project cost as of February 2017 is $114,308,900, which is a total of the $102,318,895 documented in the electronic database, plus the $11,990,005 of items noted by Treasury for which we do not have backup. Now, That is the saga of St. Jude that was inherited by the then Honorable Alan Chasney-led administration. We indicated to you that based on the report, St. Jude would cost in excess of $100 million to complete. Now let us put that into perspective. The Labour Party during their term in opposition said the hospital was over 90% complete. And all it would take to finish the hospital was some chemical and some paint. Mr. John Peters, one who's supposed to be a civil engineer by profession, who also headed or was part of a committee that did the review of the St. Jude project for the present Labour Party administration, indicated that $5 to $20 million would finish the St. Jude project. As I speak to you today, it was interesting sitting and listening to the Untold Stories documentary and watching what was happening at St. Jude. Now I want to ask St. Lucians this question. Had the Honorable Alan Chasney-led administration and Guy Joseph as the Minister of Economic Development come to the people of St. Lucia, given all the information that was in the public domain, and we indicated to you that we were going to spend $100 million on the old St. Jude Hospital, what would have been your conclusion? Bobol? The government, the Labour Party who left the project, said that it would only take $5 to $20 million, paint and chemical. So St. Lucia, this is for us to be fair and unbiased about our acceptance of information. Many people believe the Labour Party that the hospital was close to completion. Yet still the same report 4 years into the Labour administration, as you saw with Mr. Elliott interviewing the engineer, one of the buildings is seen as being about 30% complete. So was the hospital ever at 60, 70, 80, and 90% complete as indicated by the Labour Party? You see, when I said you want to give the UWP a basket to carry water and you want the drum to be full, but you give the Labour Party a bucket to carry water, and instead of filling the drum, all they are doing is emptying the drum. Because let's look at it today. So, in the budget of last year, $265 million was allocated for the completion of the old St. Jude Hospital. The same project that should cost $5 to $20 million by their estimation had all of a sudden risen to $200 plus million. So, let me examine a few things that Mr. Gajada indicated. And those that stand out to me the most is that cost don't matter. Really? In a poor, struggling St. Lucia, cost does not matter? Yes, the loan came from Saudi Arabia, and maybe cost doesn't matter in Saudi Arabia, but it sure matters in St. Lucia. when parents cannot feed their children, when poverty is at an all-time high, when you had a new building that was nearing completion and would cost about 25% of the amount that you are spending now, you are telling me that cost does not matter? That you can do what you please, how you please, and it doesn't matter? Now, when a contractor can tell you cost does not matter, does that mean he has an open check on the project? Because there's no way a contractor will go into a fixed price project and tell you cost does not matter. Because cost would matter if you have a fixed price project. So did he tender on the project? And if he tendered on the project, was it a competitive tendering process? Because the contractor will not take his profits and spend on the project for the government. So there are lots of unanswered questions by the statement made by Mr. Reno Gajada that cost does not matter, it is finishing the project. And UWP said that when the FDL report came out, and the FDL report said yes, the building could be salvaged. But the question was, at what cost? Would it justify spending 250 million on an 80-year-old project when every report prepared from 2010 after the fire indicated that we needed a new St. Jude hospital in the south, not a refurbished 80-year-old building? Here's another statement that was made by Mr. Gajada that stood out to me. He said he has done so much shipping via, so much freight via British Airways, he could have bought British Airways. Really? Did Mr. Reno Gajada take that money from his pocket to pay for all of that shipping on British Airways? Or all of that air freight? Let me get it correct. Shipping it's going to be much cheaper if you ship it. But if you do air freight, we know what it costs. And if Mr. Gajada himself told you, when he looked at what has been spent, he could have bought British Airways. How much is a British Airways plane selling for? So, St. Lucia, I want us to pay attention to the details of what we are being told. So, how much money is the government spending on this St. Jude hospital? Because I want us to understand, we always said, time is a revealer of all things. And time and this project has proven that the decisions made by the United Workers' Party under the Alan Chasney-led administration was the best decision for St. Jude. Now, let's go into greater details. They said the buildings we were doing was far from being complete, and that the report by the committee of which Mr. John Peters was a member indicated that the hospital was not nearing the 50% completion. It has been proven that this is a lie. Because the first two buildings to be completed and ready to move in from the George Odlum Stadium are the two buildings that is part of the new St. Jude. The physiotherapy and the dialysis building. The two most modern, built for purpose buildings, and they can call it what name they want. This is the building that is complete and ready and fit for purpose. So what does that prove? The Honorable Alan Chasney was right, and the buildings that was being constructed was closer to completion than any of the old St. Jude building. Because think of it, they do not want to continue the project started by the United Workers' Party. You think they would give top priority to the buildings that we started over the buildings that they are constructing? Yet still, the buildings, because it was designed for purpose, all the plumbing fixtures was in the foundation, everything that was required was in place, and the building, we knew where we were running the electricals through the ceiling, so they knew that it was built for purpose, and I could clearly see the picture. The buildings that stood out were the buildings that we built. Now think of it for a moment. Mr. Gajada indicated that they are working 2 shifts, and they work up to 11 p.m. every day, including the Easter holidays. Consultants, engineers, contractors, everybody working. And yet still some of the buildings, let me give them the benefit of the doubt, is about 40% complete. Can you imagine if they had put 1 year into the new building that we were constructing, that 3 years ago we would have been in the new St. Jude, a built for purpose hospital? And I challenge St. Lucians, go and watch the Untold Stories documentary. Don't watch it from the perspective of a UWP or a labor administration. Watch it from the information that is presented. Mr. Elliot has a few inches taller than me, but he could stretch his hand and touch the ceiling. And what did the engineer, Mr. Joshi, say? We work with what we were given. It's not ideal. Really? Spending $250 million and we get something that is less than ideal? And as we speak to you, St. Kitts is building a brand new hospital with the same OECC contractors who are in St. Lucia. A country of 35, maybe 50,000 people, now constructing a hospital much bigger than St. Jude. I did not have one place in the report the number of beds that will be available at the refurbished St. Jude Hospital. And of course, pen can make anything look good. It's the functionality of the hospital that we are concerned about. You saw Mr. Gajada indicate that the AC units, they are obsolete. They cannot be used. I don't know who did the procurement, but the consultant engineer in Halcro was the one procuring everything for the St. Jude Hospital when we inherited it. So you think these AC units became obsolete 4 years ago? Or 2 years ago? No. They were obsolete from the time we came there. Because sometimes salesmen sell you things they want to get rid of. And because you did not have the proper expertise in dealing with it. So, what do we know as I speak to you and as I bring my presentation to a close? We know for a fact that we are getting a makeshift hospital. And from the photos I saw, it looks good on the outside. but it is how it is going to function. As you could see, there are issues. When he was asked about the pillar in the middle in the ward, and you saw it for yourself, what was the answer? There's nothing we can do about it. It's not ideal. So what we are going to do is we are going to put a barrier and put beds. Really? Is that what our $250 million is being spent for? This $250 million could have built a brand new built-for-purpose hospital. And if the Philip J. Pierre administration did not want to use the building that was being built by the UWP-led administration, he could have built a new hospital with the money, and it would still work out better and cheaper. But St. Lucia, you have the chance to evaluate for yourself that a contractor appears to be more powerful than the Prime Minister of St. Lucia. Because I know there is a limit to the amount of money that we can spend. Because we are a struggling economy. But Mr. Reno Gajada said everything I needed to know. Cost does not matter. So cost does not matter when Labour is in office, but cost matters when UWP is in office. And cost will always matter when UWP is in office, because we are prudent financial managers of the limited resources of this country. So as you reflect, and yes, they may move in certain departments, we see the extent to which they are pushing the work. Here's the part we don't know. We heard how much conflict there is between the consultants and the contractor. Are we getting any shortcuts in the work? Are we getting substandard work? Because really and truly, you have to ask yourself, if you have to fly in all of this equipment and material on British Airways, every week there's a ship coming from the UK to St. Lucia. You mean the level of urgency is so high that we cannot wait for the weekly shipments from the UK so that St. Lucia can save some money? You choose to fly everything on British Airways, and you're saying that you've spent so much money that you could have bought British Airways? St. Lucia, this is our money. This is our tax revenue. This is a loan from the Saudis, and I don't even know whether the loan from the Saudis is being used for that, because I don't envisage that the contractor would have calculated in his costing flying in everything he needed on British Airways to the tune of being able to buy British Airways. Maybe he should have bought a plane and fly the things in. At least St. Lucia would have an asset in having a plane that we could fly an aircraft to the UK. But I want you to understand, you cannot do things regardless of the cost. We cannot do things and say cost does not matter. Cost always matters. Maybe to Mr. Reno Gajada, cost does not matter. But to the rest of St. Lucia, cost matters. And because the money is not coming from his pocket, he can say cost does not matter. So we don't know how much they are spending. Have they told us the cost of doing the St. Jude project? And Mr. Elliott asked the right questions. You were there before. And I know the inputs of this project. I had extensive discussions on the St. Jude project, which I will choose not to highlight at this point in time. But I know that Mr. Gajada was given the initial contracts at St. Jude, from the fencing to the cleaning and a number of other things, that up to a day like today, the cost has never been disclosed to St. Lucia. We were told that the Ministry of Infrastructure was involved in the costing. And I heard Mr. Eddie Henry, who is part of the project. And when they want to tell you so many bad things happen under the United Workers' Party, Mr. Henry was the same man in charge of the project under a United Workers' Party government. So if he was so bad, why did you keep him? Because Mr. Henry operated as a professional. And when he was asked the question, his answer was simply, I followed the directives that was given to me as an employee. So I don't expect them to comment on the viability of the project and whether it is good, whether it is a built-for-purpose hospital. The bosses ask them to do something, and they have done it. So St. Lucia, time will reveal the rest that we need to know of all the flaws and the challenges of St. Jude. Remember, we are in a hurricane belt. We are building for resilience. And the buildings that we have there are not resilient. I saw them casting concrete over existing concrete. And they said to level out the floors. Really? For a hospital? When we told you the hospital had all of these problems, you thought we were playing politics. Mr. Reno Gajada indicated to you that what we said was true. Everything they had to do to fix the building. And remember, we had only estimated 100 million. And the consultant, Mr. Fontinad, FDL team, indicated that when you go in there and you begin to do things, the cost may escalate. We realize as a UWP government that you are better off building a built-for-purpose building and then convert the old St. Jude into a medical university that would work alongside the hospital, and we would be getting two in place of one. That was the plan. The Labour Party needs to tell us what they are going to do with the new building. Because if you could transform the dialysis and the physiotherapy building so quickly and make it fit for purpose for the St. Jude Hospital, couldn't the same thing be done with the main building that is built to be hurricane resilient, earthquake resilient? You have a building where the roof is galvanized and timber, can be destroyed by fire, and any major hurricane can destroy the hospital that you are now spending over 250 million on. When you have a building there that would not cost you 70 million to complete, and you would have both hurricane resistant, earthquake resistant, a built for purpose hospital. St. Lucia, this is not politics. This is about making sound financial decisions and developmental decisions. Ask yourself, would you spend $250 million on an 80-year-old building not built for purpose, as opposed to a built for purpose building that you would have to spend less than 100 million and have a fully accredited modern hospital facility. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was such a powerful statement by the deputy political leader of the United Workers' Party, the former Minister for Economic Development, and I won't say former MP, I'm going to say next MP for Castries Southeast, the Honorable and the legendary Guy Joseph. And this brings about many questions, especially we as young people. We need to ask questions as to what's happening, what's going on. We see many other nations in the OECS in the Caribbean building state-of-the-art hospitals that when you walk in, it's like you're entering the future, and then you look at St. Lucia and it's reminiscent of the past. But that's for another day, because I want to welcome the MP for Micoud North, the former Prime Minister and next Prime Minister of St. Lucia, the leader of the opposition and the political leader of the United Workers' Party, the Honorable Alan Shasney, to discuss CIP with you.
Good morning. For those of persons who may have panicked a little bit, thinking that maybe I've moved to Micoud North, I'm still in Micoud South. Thank you very, very much, Mr. Master of Ceremonies. This morning, I want to take my time, so I want to apologize in advance. I don't think that there's any way possible to go through thoroughly and to give a proper account as to where we are today with the Citizenship by Investment program. Sometimes it's very good to start your presentation where you want to end it. And the question that I asked myself in preparing for this press conference this morning was, what should be the outcome of this press conference? It can't just be we come, we report on things, and there's no real outcome of the evidence that's being established. Now, the case in point will be the numerous times over the last year and a half that we have written to this government, the Prime Minister in particular, and we've made those letters always public, and we've also included those letters civil society and persons in government that we believe that are supposed to be playing some level of independent role of accountability, of checks and balances in our system, highlighting concerns that we've had about the CIP program. I can go back to June 21st of 2024. I'm not going to read the whole letter. I'm just going to read components of it. It was a letter addressed to the Prime Minister. It said, added to these woes is the chaos currently taking place at the CIP unit. The resignation of the chairman. I stop. That's June of 24, where we asked whether in fact the chairman, Mr. Lawrence Theophilus, had resigned. Not even on something as basic as that did the government ever give a definitive answer. When the Prime Minister was asked directly, he said, speak to the minister. The minister said, oh, the board had not gotten to him. But in the case that they filed recently, as recent as last month, we finally got the confirmation that not only had the chairman resigned, but so had two other board members. And so the board has been conducting its affairs for almost the last year or more with an acting chairman and 2 other board members, 3 board members. The serious questions surrounding the capability and the integrity of the CEO, the conflicting facts between the minister and the CEO, the allegations of collusion and corruption, the naming of both the minister and the CEO in the RICO case, and the breach of the CIP Act where no audited reports have been made public or tabled in the House of Parliament for the last 2 years. Prime Minister, your urgent and immediate action is required. The most immediate action calls for the resignation of the minister responsible for CIP and the CEO of the CIP unit, and that all Galaxy applications should be frozen until an independent and proper audit and reconciliation of the escrow account is completed. In addition, the so-called infrastructure option should be postponed immediately and the appropriate regulations passed to ensure it is properly governed. Instead of personal attacks and racial slurs on me and the United Workers' Party, you should direct reprimands, investigations, and terminations towards those who are responsible for the most egregious scandal. This problem will not go away by ignoring it and protecting the wrongdoers based on blind loyalty. This situation has presented you with a dilemma in choosing between party and country. This is a test of your own leadership. This was as of June last year. If I can go back a little bit more in time, April 2024. So that was in June. This was in April. It said the government recently announced during the budget estimates that the donation option within the CIP program only received 50% of its projected revenue, as it was negatively affected by the real estate option. So that means that the new programs that we're putting in were affecting the donation program, which was the mainstay of the CIP program. Whilst no further explanation was offered, it has been reported that the real estate option was being sold unlawfully at discounted prices, which the government has to date not denied or confirmed. The government has also launched a new option which will allow certain approved developers to undertake infrastructure projects for the government and to reimburse themselves by selling our citizenship for $100,000 and receiving the funds directly. The government has to date not informed the people of St. Lucia about this new option, but there's already evidence that a particular developer has begun selling this option, and even more concerning is at the subpar selling price of $80,000. That's April of 2024. The 30th of September, 2024. The situation with the CIP countries to spiral out of control, continues to spiral out of control, largely due to a lack of transparency and accountability. The most recent revelation is the situation with BMAX. The principal of BMAX was recently arrested, accused of multiple criminal offenses as part of a major organized crime crew. As a result, we demand the following: the immediate dismissal of the CEO of the CIP program, the replacement of the CIP board, the removal of the minister from the CIP portfolio, an independent investigation spearheaded by the DPP and the Auditor General with the necessary resources to carry out the task, the suspension of any further issuance of citizenships related to Galaxy and infrastructure investment until a full investigation has been completed. All of those warnings were in the absence of hard evidence. The information that we were obtaining as the leader of the opposition and as the opposition party, from reliable sources, told us all that something was horribly wrong. Despite our attempts on multiple occasions, the government refused to answer the questions. I think probably the most infamous response was by the Minister of CIP himself when he was asked how many files, how many shares, how many passports were allocated to Galaxy and to BMAX. And he said he would have to speak to Galaxy to get approval from Galaxy to reveal that information. And it was not until a meeting in Dubai that the minister revealed that it was over 5,000 files or shares that he was speaking of. So let's just go back and look chronologically what has happened as we know it now. So we now know that the contract with BMAX was signed in November of 2023. And in the case of BMAX, after signing the contract in November of 2023, the main owner was arrested in February of 2024. According to the CIP unit, when he was arrested, he immediately withdrew himself from all of the companies that he was a director of, and it was replaced. So that means as of March of 2023, they should have all known. The government of St. Lucia should have known that he was arrested. Yet the government of St. Lucia is insisting that when a reporter brought it to their attention in September, that was the first time that they knew about it. And then up until October, the government was still protecting the company, telling us, not my words, their words, telling us that he was falsely arrested and this had to do more with political motivation, that there was a new government in, and that he was still going to be innocent. And it was not until November or December that a reporter asked the Prime Minister at a press briefing what the status was, and the Prime Minister looked at her and said, "But don't you know, we've suspended the program and we're no longer doing this with BMAX." As if that was common knowledge to everyone. Nobody knew. Then we have the situation with Galaxy. So in the case of Galaxy, the contract was signed in January of 2024. And shortly afterwards, in March, early March of 2024, 4 OECS countries signed what's known as the Memorandum of Agreement. So there were meetings that had taken place with the U.S. Treasury the previous year to come up with 6 points of strengthening the CIP programs. And one of the outcomes was an MOA, a Memorandum of Agreement. So that had been in discussions and in negotiations from the previous year, as early as February of 2023. I'm not mistaken, St. Kitts actually implemented components of the MOA as early as July of 2023. So the MOA was signed by 4 of the countries in March. And then St. Lucia signed the MOA, the Memorandum of Understanding, in June of 2024. The contracts, which were submitted as evidence in my judicial review case, were leaked in November of 2024. And now we know that these contracts are legitimate. These are the real contracts. that we had. And the contracts revealed to us for the first time the answers to the questions that were being asked all along. So the first revelation in the contract is that the contract was signed by the Honorable Dr. Ernest Hilaire, and in the contract says specifically that he is representing the government of St. Lucia. So the contract is between the government of St. Lucia and Galaxy. The next revelation in the contract is in the definitions of a successful applicant. Very important. It says, means an applicant whose application for citizenship has been granted, meaning that he has passed the due diligence, and that the unit has received the administrative fees on behalf of the Caribbean Galaxy. What immediately struck me when I read that, as compared to all of the other contracts that had been signed, in this case, all the person had to do was to pay the administrative fee. Normally, in the definitions, in order to get approved, you have to show that you paid the money to the CIP unit, the 100,000, or the money for the bond, or that the money had gone into an escrow account, meaning there was some provision in here which had to ensure that the person paid the requisite money. So in this particular case, 100,000 US dollars. There's no reference to the person having to have paid the 100,000. All of the reference is that the person would have paid the administrative fee. We then went on and it said, another confirmation, Caribbean Galaxy Real Estate shall be reimbursed for the project through the receipt of qualifying investments of 6,000 applications pursuant to option 3. So there we go. The number that was so elusive all of this time finally was revealed in detail in the contract. And what struck me in reading that was when it said, shall be reimbursed. So it suggested to me that there was something more to this than just the approval of 6,000 files. It then went on and it said, Caribbean Galaxy Real Estate will not be required to hold any funds paid in respect of the applications in escrow, nor will be required to hold any monies representing agreed construction cost in escrow. I went, wow. So it means that Galaxy, in essence, would collect the $100,000 and would also collect the administrative fee. And there's no shying away from it that the contract entitles them to do that. The end part, again, was confirmation at the end that the contract was signed by the Honorable Ernest Hilaire and by Ying Jing, who was the director. In case I may have misinterpreted the contract, or anyone who would have read the contract, because it's been online, would have misinterpreted it, a new document has surfaced which reveals everything. As I said to a friend of mine, it's like having a woman in front of you and basically she's being derobed. So there's absolutely no secrets. We know exactly what everything is. We know all the private parts. We understand every single detail of that woman or that person who's now been derobed. So having the contract and now having this letter gives us total clarity, 100% clarity of what the intention was. So the letter is a letter of July 10th that was written to the CIP unit. And this letter came about because the CIP unit, after the government signed the MOA, attempted to amend the contract. Now, I want us to take a moment and understand and analyze that. As I said, the discussions with the U.S. Treasury Department and the 5 countries started in February of 2023. And there were multiple meetings that took place between the CIP unit, the central bank, to implement the 6 points that was agreed to at the meeting in Washington, D.C. with the Treasury Department. We also now know, fact, that the MOA was originally signed or initially signed by 4 countries, not including St. Lucia, in March of 2024. I say this because I very much believe that there would have been a draft of the MOA done as early as the fall of 2023. Because if governments are going to be expected to sign a document in early March, there's no way that they would have given them that draft on the eve of signing. That document would have to have been vetted by all their legal departments and gone through a due diligence process. So that means that I honestly believe, and it'll be substantiated in a letter by Galaxy, that the government of St. Lucia, when it signed this contract with Galaxy in January of 2024, would have had a pretty good idea what the MOA would have included. So the government of St. Lucia asked Galaxy, after the signing, to do 2 things. One, they asked them, given that the price of the citizenship that had gone from $100,000 to $250,000, so let's put that in numbers, at $100,000 US per family, Galaxy would have made up to $600 million US dollars. But if now the price has been moved to $250,000 US dollars, that means that Galaxy would make 1.5 billion US dollars. So the government of St. Lucia said to Galaxy, given that the price has gone to the $250,000, would you consider either reducing the number of files, the 6,000 files that you have, or shares, or increasing the amount of money that you were prepared to fund? So remember, in this instance, in the contract that we have, the government of St. Lucia would have given Galaxy 6,000 files, and in return, Galaxy was going to provide funding or financing of 100 million US dollars. So it says, Caribbean Galaxy agrees to provide requisite financing of $100 million for the construction project cost. So basically what the government of St. Lucia, the CIP unit was saying, can you either reduce the number of files or increase the amount from 100 million to a higher amount? And the second thing that they asked them to do was to amend the part of the contract that allowed Galaxy to receive all the monies themselves, and instead, and I quote, on a reduction, Kermingat's position on the proposal in our meeting whereby we suggested that clients pay the qualifying investment and associated administrative fees directly to the CIP unit. Fundamental change to the contract. So it is in response to this letter that we get to know everything that we want to know. So the first part of the letter is paragraph 7, and it says the following. You will appreciate that the counterparty to the agreement, the government of St. Lucia, has no ability unilaterally to alter the terms of the agreement which were contractually agreed. Indeed, the agreement specifically, and here's the word, envisaged the possibility of an increase in the minimum qualifying investment and set out an agreed formula to recompense to us in such an event. It's saying to the government, there's no need to amend the contract. The contract had already contemplated that there was going to be a change. And therefore, there were provisions put into the contract to manage if in case the price went up or the price went down or there were any other changes, how the two parties were going to deal with it. Now that makes sense because when the contract was signed in January of 2024, it would be difficult for me or for anybody else to believe that the government did not know what the MOA would have included, the Memorandum of Agreement. But you see, it's when people say things that we now understand, because what you remember was the Prime Minister and the Minister of CIP saying that we asked for a grandfather clause because it was St. Lucia's time. It was St. Lucia's turn. Now, what they never told you about was what are they talking about? It was for St. Lucia to have an advantage in the marketplace in which they could sell more files. So they knew what they were doing. They knew where the other countries were going to go. And they deliberately signed the contract, giving Galaxy that advantage, thinking that they were going to get a grandfather clause. Eight. Importantly, the payment of monies following the sale of these shares was not to be held in escrow. It's repeated because that's also in the contract. Instead, it was to be held for Galaxy's account. Exactly what the contract said. The money was not ever intended to go into the CIP unit. It was always supposed to go to Galaxy. The quid pro quo, what does that mean? That means our understanding of the deal. So we did something for you, and in return, you were going to do something for us. That's what quid pro quo means. Some people can associate quid pro quo to corruption, and many times it's been associated with corruption, but it's simply just a way to say our understanding that I would do this for you and you in turn would do this for me. That's what quid pro quo means. Was that Galaxy's payment of monies for the purposes of the project was not dependent upon the sale of shares. So what Galaxy is saying, the $100 million that we were financing you, US, never was dependent on how much we sold the 6,000 files were for. But what it's saying is that the 6,000 files is a commitment, regardless of whether they're able to obtain all the money or not. So the two are completely separated. So the quid pro quo is, I will lend you $100 million, and in return, you're going to give me 6,000 files. And giving the 6,000 files now takes on a completely different definition, because those 6,000 files, Galaxy was allowed to collect all the money themselves. That's what the quid pro quo was. We're going to bypass all the normal systems. You fund us $100 million, and in return, we're going to give you 6,000 files, and all you have to do is send the applicant in. Once the applicant passes the due diligence, pay the administrative fee, and we will issue the passport. So we now know what the quid pro quo was a clear understanding, a wink of the eye, that we will minimize the bureaucratic process of getting these things approved. And we'll bypass the law, which would have required the CIP unit to have ensured that they collected the $100,000, to bypass that. And they're 100% right. There's absolutely no relationship between the $100 million in funding, meaning the CIP unit didn't go and find out if the $100 million was spent before they issued the passports. There was no relationship other than it was a quid pro quo. I want us to really appreciate the significance of that point. And the judicial review case, that's primarily what it's about. Did the minister, as a minister of CIP, have the authority to sign a contract in which he was obligating the state to borrow $100 million US? And did he have the authority to turn around and say, hey, I'm going to give you 6,000 files as reimbursement? Whether in fact the CIP Act and the Finance Act were breached, that will be determined. But in the meanwhile, as I've said, this person standing in front of us has been completely derobed, so we understand exactly clearly what the intention was. The quid pro quo was that Galaxy's payment of monies for the purposes of the project was not dependent upon the sale of shares. Thus, Galaxy bore the commercial risk in that regard. It may have been able to sell less than the full 6,000 shares, but would remain committed to funding the project to the value of $100 million. Now, if a company is given 6,000 files and it has a market value of 100,000 and now has a market value of 250,000, and there's no checks and balances as to how much they're going to sell it for, wouldn't they just sell it at whatever price? And that's a fair question. And if we asked the CIP unit, which we did, was there underselling in the marketplace? What we kept on hearing was, this is a commercial deal. We don't know. We don't know what commissions are being paid. We don't know how does the CIP prove that the $100,000 was paid in this case? They cannot. They can't. Conversely, if Galaxy were able to sell the shares for more than the minimum charges, those additional monies would be for the account of Galaxy. Very revealing. So what Galaxy is saying, one, you cannot amend the number of files that we're getting, because that was a prearranged agreement under a quid pro quo, and we took the market risk. Secondly, they're saying now that the price has gone up to $250,000, we had agreed that the increase would go to us, Galaxy. I want us to understand that. So instead of Galaxy getting 100,000, now Galaxy is entitled to keep 250,000. So to take on a loan of $100 million, the government agreed to allow them to get $600 million. 600% more. And then now, the value has gone to $1.5 billion US. So again, let me repeat that. It means for a loan of 100 million US dollars, Galaxy now can get up to $1.5 billion as its reimbursement. The last part I want to read is section 12. No, sorry. Two more parts. A, thus contrary to the suggestion of your letter, remember the suggestions that the government wanted to do was to reduce the number of files or increase the amount of the loan and to get Galaxy to put the money into the CIP unit. It says there is no obligation on the part of Galaxy to increase its funding of the project as a result of the proposed increase of the minimum charge. Likewise, there is no contractual right on the part of the government of St. Lucia to insist upon such an agreement. So they're holding to the contract and the details in the contract saying that it had been anticipated the price would go up and it had been agreed previously that Galaxy would keep 100% of the money. B, there's no ability on the part of the government of St. Lucia to reduce the number of shares to be provided pursuant to the agreement. As such, the government of St. Lucia remains committed to giving Galaxy 6,000 shares as reimbursement for the project. So they're not prepared to amend, even though it's gone to $1.5 billion, they get to keep the 6,000 shares. Further, instead of reducing the number of shares, the government of St. Lucia contractually required to provide additional shares to the government of St. Lucia, to Galaxy, to compensate it for the increase in the minimum charges. So what does that mean? The administrative fee also went up. So the administrative fee went up from $30,000 to $50,000. And so what Galaxy is saying is that the government of St. Lucia agreed that if that happened, that they would increase the number of shares that they were getting to pay for the difference. Wow. I'm going to leave this last part for a little bit, and let us just focus on what we've just now learned. Some people maybe have heard it before, and some people are probably learning it for the first time. That as early as April of 2024, as leader of the opposition, we were alerting the government of St. Lucia there was a problem. And we asked that the Minister of CIP be suspended, removed from the program. We asked that the CEO, who has literally disappeared, be fired. And he should be fired because he went to Washington, D.C. and lied. Originally, they said he went up on personal business. Then all of a sudden, we heard it was on CIP business. The next thing we know that the CIP is paying for his legal fees. And there were several conflicts in the statements that he made of information that he provided in Washington, D.C., which were revealed by Mr. Martinez, that he's never answered to. And up to today, like today, we have no clue where it is. But we had asked that the minister be suspended, that the CEO be fired, that the board be replaced, and we also asked that there be an independent audit of the program as early as April. We made another claim in June, we made another claim in September, and then, as you know, we filed our case for judicial review in February of 2024. The government now has come out to say to us that they have suspended the program, the infrastructure program, and they have terminated the contract with BMAX. Remember, that's exactly what we had asked them to do all the way back in April. And they told us that we were lying, that we were creating, we were being, I think what was the term that they were used? We were enemies of development of Progress of St. Lucia and dismissed our allegations but revealed nothing. But eventually now we have all the facts in front of us, and we now know that the enemies of transparency, the enemies of good governance in this country is the Labour Party. 100%. That's an undeniable fact that they are the enemies of transparency and of accountability and of good governance. And they continue to waste the resources of this country. And they come in front of us and lie bold-faced lies. We know all these things now. So the government has said to us that they have now suspended the program and terminated the contract. The problem is, like the same statement that was made about BMAX in November or December to a media person, there's zero evidence. We have no evidence that that's actually true. And all the persons that got us into this problem in the first place are the same persons that the government is relying on to get us out. And that's what the press conference is about today. That's why we're having the press conference today. Because there has been such a breach of governance, clear malfeasance on this government's part. And we have to ask the question. And sadly, given what has taken place in times, it's a fair question. When Ernest Hilaire signed the contract, did anybody else know that he signed the contract? We know there's a diminished board at CIP. Did they vet it? And one would expect that as he was signing it on behalf of the government of St. Lucia, that the Attorney General would have vetted it. And because there was a loan arrangement involved, you would have had to have imagined that the Director of Finance and the Permanent Secretary in Finance also would have vetted this contract. And that's why it's important for us to understand how those persons are implicated. Because clearly in the contract by Galaxy, it says that we're going to finance $100 million. Meaning that Galaxy was going to lend the government of St. Lucia $100 million US. And instead of being paid out of money through the consolidated account, the people were going to get paid, the company was going to get paid instead through the issuance of passports. And I know everybody gets confused with shares and files and what's going on. So let's bring it down to simply what it is. Galaxy was given 6,000 quota for 6,000 families to get their citizenship. And a family can be anywhere from 2 people to 5 people. Some cases more. So if we just take it as an average of 3 people per family, and there's 6,000 shares, that's 18,000 passports at minimum. And as I said to you previously, people are getting the big money, but in this particular case, all that you have to do is to print a passport. It's a paper. And the quid pro quo was to make it even easier, meaning we're going to give you 18,000 passports. We're not going to ask any questions. We'll do the due diligence on it. We're not going to ask any questions. You collect the money, and you just provide us with the $100 million loan. So the Attorney General and the Director of Finance had to be involved in this process. because the minister does not have the authority, and included would be the prime minister. And you would think that if in fact they're going to borrow $100 million US, that there was consultation with cabinet. And one could also argue that there should be been a bill to the House, to Parliament. Instead, this thing was shrouded in secrecy. Denial after denial after denial of what was taking place in the country. We have to ask, did the minister sign this by himself? And if he did, now that it's all been revealed, why is he still there? Why is he still there? And if in fact the Attorney General and the Director of Finance were party to this, and the Prime Minister was party to this, and Cabinet was party to this, then, my fellow citizens, we are in serious trouble. Because the construct of this contract can only suggest to us that the lack of checks and balances, the circumvention of our laws, was malfeasance, bad intention, wrongdoing, and some will go as far as to say corruption. Because state funds are simply being treated as some level of commodity and being put into a third party of which there's no accountability. Galaxy is telling you, I'm going to give you the $100 million, but don't ask me any questions as to how I'm selling my 6,000 shares, 6,000 families. Now, at the last House sitting, I reminded the government that the only authority that can approve the expenditure of monies by government is Parliament. And there's a part of this now that has been revealed which makes the situation even more concerning. And that is the admission by the minister that of the 6,000 files, 3,000 families have already applied. What does that mean? 3,000 families have paid Galaxy the $100,000, have paid them for the administrative fee. 3,000 families have paid lawyers here locally to process their applications. Those 3,000 families have paid the $8,000 for the due diligence of their background checks. And they've taken time to send in all the photographs and do all the paperwork, and those files have been processed, but the government says to us they have not been approved. So if you've now suspended the program and you've now terminated the contract, what obligation does that create to the state? Given the letter that Galaxy has written here, Galaxy believes that they're entitled to the value of 6,000 files, which today is $1.5 billion. And this government has created a quagmire, a mess, that the reality is that the taxpayers of this country will have to pay. Far less the reputational damage that's been created and the allegations that there has been discounting. The government cannot confirm or deny whether there has been any because they have no ways of knowing. They left that alone. They didn't understand that their responsibility was to make sure that there was no underselling, so that there was no breach of our law. I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned because our Constitution and our laws don't have a solution to this problem. Because the persons that we've given the authority to to investigate and hold everybody accountable, all appear to be complicit. The Attorney General, Director of Finance, Prime Minister, Cabinet, Permanent Secretaries, boards, CEOs. No one has said a word in the face of clear degradation of our laws. All of them who are supposed to be representing and protecting the best interest of the people of this country have failed. And you know, I think of two examples. Some persons who are old enough may remember the Watergate, where President Nixon was caught involved in a betrayal of the trust of the people of America. And it showed that even in the great America, some of the institutions didn't know how to handle this, a sitting president. And ultimately, it was as the information became available more and more and more and more, and which was then cemented when the evidence came out because of the tapes. So at that point, there was no denial. Nixon used to tape all of his conversations. When those tapes were finally made public, the senators and congresspersons, regardless of whether they were Democrats or Republicans, all had to accept that this was wrong. And started the process of impeaching President Nixon. And his closest colleagues went to him to tell him it's over and that he should resign and save America the embarrassment, which he did. Can that happen here? Can we ever believe that this information is out? It's very clear what this information is saying. That the parliamentarians would ever be strong enough themselves to support a vote of no confidence? I certainly have not seen anything in the behavior of some of the parliamentarians. In fact, when they're caught, their denial is so strong. They do everything to twist the information, to suggest it's somebody else's fault, that we're misinterpreting the information. And that's why I'm taking my time today, because there can be no other conclusion of the malfeasance, the wrongdoing, and the intent of the wrongdoing based on all the information we have. The contract, Galaxy's own interpretation, and what we're seeing taking place now. So I don't believe there's any opportunity that the parliamentarians, the Labour parliamentarians, will turn on themselves, and particularly when we now know they're complicit. Because even if they were not complicit before, they're complicit now, because all this information was out. Was there an independent investigation so they could be briefed to understand whether in fact that they were fooled by the minister? We have to say no, because nothing has happened. The simple consequence was to say, okay, we're going to suspend the program and terminate the contract, of which there is no evidence that they've even done that. So where does that leave us? Well, there's the other example now of South Korea, which I've mentioned a couple of times, where the president of South Korea attempted to put in a state of emergency so that he could pass legislation. And upon hearing that, the citizens of South Korea that same day went to Parliament, surrounded Parliament, and prevented the parliamentarians from leaving until they reversed the decision. And then they sat around and put pressure on until the president was impeached. And that same president today is on trial. Have we gotten to that point where we understand that the power within Parliament, the power of all the civil servants in this country, comes from the people? your consent. And as much as there is fear in the country of saying anything individually, we must find the courage to know that we cannot continue to give consent to those who are in clear breach of our trust. How many more examples? This is not new where I can question the integrity of Ernest Hilaire. It's something I asked years ago in the Jufali affair, in the Range Rover affair, and now today what's taking place with CIP. And it suggests that there may be and probably are many more things that he's involved in that we don't know. Because if you do what I did, and I go back now and I listen to the tapes because now I have the information, and I listen to his interviews, you can see blatant lied. And those lies should not be taken lightly because they are a breach of trust. He is supposed to be sworn on the Constitution to protect their laws and work in the best interest of the people of this country, and he has failed to do so. And those persons who give him the authority they themselves have failed. We've written to civil society. I get it. Persons in a position, they have contracts with their businesses, have contracts with government. They have friends who have, they have family members who have, and everybody's scared to say something. But I'm warning all of us that if we allow this to continue unabated and we don't find a way where future politicians, future civil servants don't recognize that the ultimate authority is the people, and we don't exercise that authority, then we have nothing. We ourselves become complicit. We ourselves become complicit. So I've taken my time today to go in more detail, simply that we can all understand that this whole situation has been derobed. There's no shadows, there's no clothing, there's nothing hiding anything. We know exactly what has transpired. Now you want to see, I've left the most egregious part. Well, I shouldn't say the most egregious, but it's the part at the end of the letter that really tells us something is wrong. So it says, on a separate note, the government of St. Lucia agreed, pursuant to the agreement, to submit a list of proposed projects and costs which would be subject of funding by Galaxy. Galaxy has repeatedly chased the government of St. Lucia to provide such a list and to agree on contractors, etc., since the conclusion of the agreement earlier this year. In addition, in May of 2024, Galaxy provided a draft memorandum of understanding to facilitate the project and Galaxy's investment in St. Lucia's infrastructure. This paragraph is also confirmed by the government, who kept on telling us that they're going to upfront the money to do this $100 million because it's the $100 million and what it was supposed to do that was benefiting the people of St. Lucia. The only justification for giving them 6,000 files and bypassing all our laws, ultimately, end of the day, was for the execution of the $100 million project, which had nothing to do with them selling the 6,000 shares. It says, unfortunately, we have had no substantive responses from the government of St. Lucia. Instead, all we have had is a notification of 2 limited road projects relating to the recent Cricket World Cup. Although these works will be funded by Galaxy, the manner in which Galaxy was notified of these works did not comply with the terms of the agreement, nor the draft memorandum of understanding. As such, we invite the government of St. Lucia to engage with Galaxy to agree upon the infrastructure projects and their implementation so that Galaxy can fulfill its side of the agreement. So, the process that Galaxy is speaking of, which is substantiated in the contract, is that they were supposed to agree on what the projects were. The government was supposed to recommend who the contractors are, but the final say was for Galaxy to make the choice of contractors. Galaxy would have paid the contractors directly for the work. The contractors eventually would provide the paid invoices to the government of St. Lucia for the fulfillment of the $100 million loan. Now, anyone who's been involved in government procurement procedures knows that that cannot happen and should not happen for a lot of reasons. But even to spend the $100 million, there was no urgency. So if I was, what's his name? The forensic auditor, Lindquist. If I was a forensic auditor, and I was to say, wait a second, the $100 million was not the priority. The $100 million was not the priority, because they didn't do it. So it means that the benefits must have been somewhere else. Could it be? Could it be that the benefits was in selling the files and the processing fees? Could it be that there was another quid pro quo that was not in the contract? Could there have been another quid pro quo? I'm only asking the question. Because if there was no urgency to spend the $100 million to benefit the people of this country, which clearly, according to the Galaxy, was available from January, they couldn't even find you to sign a memorandum of understanding. They couldn't even get the number of road projects or projects that you wanted them to fund. So what were you busy doing? Why were you protecting this project? And so whereas I may have thought that we have unraveled everything, sadly, because the monies are going into Galaxy's hands, there's no accountability to the people of St. Lucia as to how Galaxy chooses to spend its money, other than the $100 million. And there was no rush to spend that. So I just want to say, I hate it that I can look back and say that we did all the right things and asked all the right questions, and that the government clearly betrayed us. And you. I hate that. I hate that we're right. But now that we know that we're right, I'm saying to all St. Lucians, all citizens of this country, regardless of which political persuasion you're in, I'm asking civil society, I'm asking those civil servants, despite what has happened now, stand up and do the right thing. Right the wrong. That's what we need to do. For the sake of our own country, for the reputation of our own country, think of what this looks like on the outside. That there's clear evidence of malfeasance and wrongdoing and corruption and possible corruption. And we're doing nothing, and everybody now knows because the contracts are here. Feel free to know that this contract has been verified, legitimate. The letter, verified, legitimate, authentic. And I ask you, when the government says that they've suspended the program and terminated the contracts, what evidence have they provided to anyone in this country that that's in fact what the case is? Because I don't know of any company in the world that would have a contract worth $1.5 billion US are simply willing to walk away from that. I don't know how you handled the 3,000 families that have already applied. So this is the biggest scandal we've had in the history of our country, and it requires a response that is unprecedented in this country. The system is ultimately built on the people who empower persons to work on our behalf. We have given them that authority. And ultimately, if we are to have that power and that authority to give, we must exercise it. There is no one in the system right now, my friends, there's no one in the system that is going to hold the Prime Minister, the Attorney General, the Director of Finance, Cabinet, the Minister accountable. No one. So the only persons left to do so are ourselves, and we have to dig deep and find courage and to start understanding that if we want this democracy known as St. Lucia to work, then we have to exercise that authority at this point, because ultimately the decision lays with the people of this country. And that can only be expressed by coming out, if we're going to have a march, if we're going to sign a petition, whatever it is that it takes to show the government that enough is enough and it's time to right the wrong. Thank you.
Thank you very much, political leader and MP for Micoud South. So Elisha, don't worry, but Micoud North will be back in Parliament under the United Workers' Party in the representation of Mr. Elisha Norbert. But I have some questions before we close directed to the Labour Party. And like our political leader said, that this has been one of the biggest scandals in St. Lucia. So I really want to ask the Labour Party, first question, especially from our young people, why did you sign the deal, Unesile? Why did you sign it? And how do you expect us to trust a program that lacks transparency? Or even greater, how do you expect us to trust a government that lacks transparency? What is your plan to fix the damage done to St. Lucia's international image? And what would you say to a young person watching their country being sold while they continue to struggle to survive? And finally, on the CIP, do you really believe the average St. Lucian has benefited from this program? And like our deputy political leader, Guy Joseph, former Minister for Economic Development, alluded in his presentation about St. Jude, I have some questions about that for the St. Lucia Labour Party. How many more millions will you burn before the people see a single hospital bed in use? And why should young taxpayers believe in your leadership when even a hospital turns into a financial scandal? And finally, where exactly did the millions go because there is no functioning hospital to show for it? St. Lucians, the code for this election is yellow. We are tired of the lack of transparency. We are tired of the half information. It is time to vote code yellow and bring St. Lucia back to prosperity. This has been the UWP press briefing. I am Senator Joshua Harrow. I bid all of you a good day, a wonderful week, and a prosperous year. Let us bring St. Lucia back to yellow territory. Have a wonderful afternoon.